The stack arrived every Monday without fail, bound in a rubber-sealed ministry pouch and deposited on the corner of her desk by the third-floor flu courier before she had finished her first cup of tea. Welfare referrals and follow-up flags, most of them. Routing errors. The occasional duplicate. The sort of paperwork that existed, she had come to believe, because the wizarding world had an institutional compulsion to generate it, regardless of whether anyone read it. She poured a fresh cup from the thermos she kept in the bottom drawer, smoothed the front of her lime-green robes, healer's robes, St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, certified, the insignia stitched in silver thread over her left breast, and settled in to work. Somewhere below, in the ground-floor intake corridor, a cauldron explosion victim was being escorted through the doors. She could hear it from 3 rooms away, the high-pitched sound of someone badly surprised by their own equipment, the brisk footsteps of the intake healers, the particular thud of a gurney being wheeled fast. Ground floor, artifact accidents, ran busy on Mondays, she had found, and Tuesdays, and every other day that amateur potion brewers decided their kitchen was an appropriate place for experimentation. The same with wand backfirings, the same with broom crashes. People were endlessly inventive about how they hurt themselves, and endlessly surprised that it had happened. 4 floors above her, the Janus Thicky ward was quiet. It was always quiet. The permanent cases, the unliftable jinxes, the hexes that had settled too deep to peel back, the incorrectly applied charms that no charm reversal team had yet been able to touch, did not, as a rule, make noise. The 2 auras who had been there since 1981 made no noise at all. They had been tortured into a twilight by Bellatrix Lestrange and her associates, and there was no reversal for what had been done to them. There was only management. There was only the quiet and the ward healer's footsteps, and the soft sound of someone who had once been very capable being helped to eat. There was also, as of June, Gilderoy Lockhart. A memory charm backfire. He had come in confused and optimistic, and would almost certainly leave the same way. She opened the first form in the stack and got to work. The forms were, on the whole, administrative rather than clinical. A welfare flag received. An AMRS incident report forwarded for review. A record of a child's magical episode that had required ministry attendance, with a notation requesting follow-up from the hospital's admissions register. Most of them were routed without action required. The child had been checked on. The situation had been resolved. Everything was fine. She stamped, she initialed, she moved to the next. She had been doing this job for 3 years, though she had been a healer for 11, and she had learned not to expect the forms to tell her anything she had not already heard. A child had frightened themselves with accidental magic, and a ministry officer had attended. The officer had noted, child appeared healthy. Child appeared adequately housed. Child appeared fine. She had learned that appeared was doing a great deal of work in those sentences. She was halfway through the stack when she found it. The file was thin for 12 years of existence, thinner than some files she had processed that covered a single incident. It had a name on the front, a ministry reference number, and a hospital admissions cross code linking it to a welfare register she had not known was active. H.J. Potter. She did not recognize the name immediately. She turned the file over, looked at the reference number, and then opened it. 3 pages inside, 3 welfare flag reports, each one less than a page, each one stamped at the top with the same phrase in the same ministry typeface. Closed, no action required. She read the stamp on the first form, read it again on the second. On the third, there was something else below it, a marginal note in small, precise handwriting that did not match the typeset. It read, Per Minister's Office. Circumstances exceptional. Do not escalate. She set the file down on her desk and looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it back up and read the flag reports from the beginning. The first flag had been submitted by an accidental magic reversal squad attendee. No exact date. The form predated the 1990 standardization of AMRS paperwork, pre-1991. The attendee had been called to an address in Little Whinging, Surrey, 4 Privet Drive, following a registered magical incident in the vicinity of a juvenile wizard. In the section marked General Observations, the officer had written, "Child presence with indicators of malnourishment. Clothing consistent with hand-me-downs of a significantly larger person. Emotional affect restricted. Housing appears inconsistent with appropriate provision for a child demonstrating magical aptitude." 7 lines. 7 lines were the most clinical way she knew to say what those 7 lines were saying. The second flag had been filed in August 1992 at the same Surrey address, following a hover charm detection. The officer's observations were more detailed this time, or perhaps the officer had been more observant. Child housed in a room recently converted from a storage space beneath a staircase. Child does not appear to have clothing intended for his own size. No personal belongings of note. A padlock is affixed to the outside of the child's door. She stopped reading. A padlock on the outside of the door. She kept reading. The third flag was the most recent. 7 days ago. An AMRS team had attended the Privet Drive address following what was recorded as an accidental inflation incident involving a Muggle relative, since memory modified and restored to normal. The team's field notes were appended to the back of the form, and they were the most detailed yet. Child approximately 13 years of age, thin for his age, wearing what appear to be adult-sized second-hand garments, several sizes too large. Child found outside the property address at approximately 9 in the evening without adult supervision, in possession of a school trunk, an owl in its cage, and a wand. Child identified as H.J. Potter, notable scar on forehead consistent with records. She did not need to look up what the scar was. Every witch and wizard in Britain knew what that scar was. She sat with the 3 reports for a long time. She didn't know H.J. Potter. She knew nothing about him except what was written here. And what was written here was, she thought, precisely the problem. 3 pages, 12 years, 3 visits by ministry-employed attendees, each of whom had written down what they saw, each of whom had attached their observations to the correct form, and each of whom had watched those forms go into the system and come back stamped. No action required. No action required. No action required. Per Minister's Office. Circumstances exceptional. Do not escalate. The stack on her desk still had 20 more forms in it. She had been doing this job for 3 years, and in 11 years as a healer, she had closed welfare flag reports before, many of them, because many of them were reports about incidents that had been properly investigated and found resolved. She knew the difference between a file that had been closed because the situation was fine, and a file that had been closed because closing it was convenient. This was not a file that had been closed because the situation was fine. She pulled out a fresh routing form from the second drawer. She wrote, in her own small handwriting, "Welfare concern, unresolved. 3rd flag received. Prior closures attributed to Minister's Office directive. Documentation for all 3 closures does not meet standard DMLE review protocol. No follow-up visit to child recorded at any stage. Forwarding to Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Child safeguarding. For formal review. Action required." She signed it. She stamped it with the hospital's official routing mark. She attached it to the front of H.J. Potter's file, 3 pages and the weight of 12 years, and placed it in the outgoing tray for the ministry flu mail. Then she moved to the next form in the stack. She had 8 more forms to process before the noon courier came. She processed them without incident. She did not think again about H.J. Potter, because she had done what she could do, and the rest was not in her hands. The outgoing tray sat on the corner of the desk. The hospital did not know what it had just set in motion. Institutions did not think of themselves that way. They received, and they assessed, and they routed, and they filed. And on this particular Monday, one procedure, the procedure of receiving a welfare concern and marking it closed, had been replaced by a different one, the procedure of forwarding that concern to someone who had not yet decided what to do with it. That was all. It was, it turned out, everything. Harry had been waking up at 7:30 for as long as he could remember, because at the Dursleys there were always chores to be started before anyone else came downstairs, and a great deal of noise to confirm that you had started them. His body had not yet understood that this particular summer was different. He lay still, listening for sounds that were not there. The ceiling clomp of Dudley, the shriek of the kettle in the kitchen he was not supposed to touch, the particular silence his aunt had for mornings. None of it came. What came instead was the leaky cauldron waking up through the floorboards, low conversation, and the sound of glasses being collected, and the distant thrum of Charing Cross Road beginning its day. He had a room. It was small, with a window that rattled slightly when lorries went past on the Muggle Street outside, and a lock that he could work from the inside, and a wardrobe where he had put his school trunk. He used the lock every night. Not because he needed to particularly, because he could. On the nightstand was a ministry pamphlet. He had been handed it 2 weeks ago in the common room by the barman, who had passed them out to all the guests, with the resigned manner of someone executing a directive he had not been consulted on. The photograph on the front moved. A hollow-faced man with long, matted dark hair and eyes that stared at something just beyond the camera, sunken and very still, the way eyes got when they had been looking at stone walls for a very long time. Sirius Black, the pamphlet read. Dangerous. Escaped from Azkaban. He had read it enough times that he could have reproduced every word from memory. He turned it face down and went to get breakfast. He had been told, in a general and unspecific way, not to wander. He went to Diagon Alley anyway. The morning was bright and already warm, and Diagon Alley was busy in the way it always was in the last weeks before term. Families with school lists, students comparing new books in front of Flourish and Blots, owls stacked outside Aelops in rows that reached head height. Harry moved through it with the easy familiarity he had started to feel here, which was a thing he had not expected to feel about a place he lived temporarily. He ended up at Florian Fortescue's, which had become a habit. The ice cream parlour was on the sunny side of the alley, and Fortescue himself had a habit of coming out from behind his counter when Harry was there to top up the cone without being asked, and to explain things about medieval witch-burning that had been unexpectedly useful for Harry's History of Magic summer essay. Harry ordered chocolate and raspberry, and sat at one of the outside tables and let the sun come at his face. He ate slowly. There was nothing he needed to do with the morning, which was still slightly astonishing to him. The hours of this summer that had simply been his to move around in. He watched the alley go past and felt something that he did not have a name for, and did not try to name. He was halfway through the cone when he heard Neville Longbottom, 10 feet away, drop something. There was a recognizable quality to the noise Neville made when he had dropped something. A particular combination of the object hitting the ground and Neville's response to the object hitting the ground. And Harry turned in time to see Neville crouching on the cobblestones, gathering up a scatter of parchment rolls, face red with the mild, focused embarrassment of someone trying to resolve the situation before anyone noticed. A short distance away, holding a shopping bag with the settled patience of someone who had made peace with waiting, was Neville's grandmother. A small, upright woman in an elaborate set of robes and a pointed hat heavily trimmed with a stuffed vulture, conveying without any particular expression that she had standards, and that the parchment situation fell within the expected range. Harry went over and helped collect the parchment. "Harry," Neville said, surprised and genuinely pleased in the uncomplicated way that was particular to Neville. "Neville." Harry handed over the rolls. "School supplies?" "Most of them. Still need potions ingredients." He handed the parchment to his grandmother, who deposited it in the shopping bag without comment, and they fell into step together toward the apothecary at the far end of the alley. Harry walked alongside him in the comfortable, slightly distracted way he had with Neville. 2 years of sharing a dormitory and a house table created a particular easy companionship that didn't require much maintenance. Neville walked at a pace that was slightly too fast for browsing, the pace of someone conscious of a schedule. "You been here long?" Neville asked. 3 weeks. Harry thought about it. "Nearly." "Is it good?" "Yeah," Harry said. It came out more simply than he had meant it to, because there was not a more complicated word for what 3 weeks at the Leaky Cauldron had been. "It's good." Neville nodded, and Harry noticed again the way he was walking. Purposeful, not quite hurried, but aimed. "We've got somewhere to be after," he said, before Harry had quite formed the question. "Where?" Neville's eyes went sideways to him for a moment, the particular glance of someone deciding how much to say. "The hospital. My parents are there." He said it the way you said something you had said many times before, in the flat tone that came from having reduced a complicated thing to its simplest possible version. He did not say more. His attention went back to the cobblestones. Harry kept walking. He did not ask which hospital. He did not ask what was wrong, or how long his parents had been there, or whether they were getting better. None of those questions were his to ask on a Wednesday morning in Diagon Alley, when Neville had not offered anything more than 4 words, and Harry had grown up in a house where asking questions about things that were not explained to you was its own kind of mistake. And even though he knew this was a different situation and a different kind of not asking, he did not have the words for whatever else he might say. So he said nothing, and Neville's shoulders settled very slightly, and they kept walking. At the apothecary, Neville went through his potions list with care, his grandmother producing her own, and working through it with the assistant in quick, certain terms that left no room for confusion. Harry waited outside. When Neville came out, he had a bag of ingredients and a slightly less pressured expression. "We should get going," he said. "Gran's doing the flu." "See you on the 1st, Harry said. "Yeah." Neville shifted his bags. "See you on the 1st. He watched them go, Neville navigating his parcels with the attentiveness of someone who had already dropped things once and did not intend to provide himself with a second lesson, his grandmother moving alongside him with the brisk economy of someone who had organized the day thoroughly. They turned at the corner of the alley and were gone. Harry stood where he was for a moment, in the middle of the cobblestones. His own parents were dead. He had understood this at some basic level for as long as he had understood anything, had been told they had died in a car crash when he was very small, which he had absorbed as children, absorbed things that were simply true, immovable, and prior to memory. He had found out later that this was not what had happened. He had understood, over time, the full shape of what he was to the wizarding world. The boy who had survived, the boy whose parents had been killed. Neville's parents were alive. They were in a hospital somewhere in this city, and Neville went to visit them with his grandmother on school supply days, and came out of the apothecary with an expression that was not quite closed and not quite open, and that Harry did not know the right word for. He stood in the cobblestones trying to work out which was worse, and found he couldn't, and then felt faintly that it was the wrong kind of question, and then went back to Florian Fortescue's for a second cone, because the morning was still fine, and he still had nowhere he was required to be. He fell asleep that night before the sun had finished going down. The pamphlet was still face down on the nightstand. The lightning bolt scar on his forehead was exactly as it had been for the last 2 years. Present, slightly irregular to the touch, and completely silent. He did not think about 4 Privet Drive. He did not know that somewhere across London, in a building that looked from the outside like an abandoned department store and looked from the inside like a hospital, there was a file with his name on the front that had been in an outgoing tray for a day and a half. He did not know that someone had read it and declined to close it and written a routing note in small, careful handwriting and put it in the flu mail. He did not know it existed. There was no reason for him to. He was 13 years old, and he was warm, and he went to sleep. The Sirius Black manhunt had been on the head of the DMLE's desk since the 1st of August. 22 working days, 43 public sightings, 2 fruitless hit wizard deployments. She was working through the latest overnight batch of reports when the flu mail chute delivered a parcel from St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, tied with the yellow cord used for urgent transfers and marked in red ink, safeguarding, urgent. She finished the black report she was reading. Then she set it in its tray and picked up the St. Mungo's parcel. The routing note was on top, written in a small, precise hand. Welfare concern, unresolved. 3rd flag received. Prior closures attributed to Minister's Office directive. Documentation for all 3 closures does not meet standard DMLE review protocol. No follow-up visit to child recorded at any stage. Forwarding to Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Child Safeguarding, for formal review. Action required. Signed by a healer at St. Mungo's admissions, who had also, she noted, included her full healer registration number, a detail that said something about how seriously the writer expected to be taken. She set the routing note to one side and opened the file. H.J. Potter, the name registered before anything else, because she was not made of stone, and Harry Potter was not an ordinary name. She set the recognition aside in the methodical way she set most things aside, acknowledged it, catalogued it as a variable that would complicate the work, and returned to the page. The file was thin. 3 pages for a child who was now 13 years old. 3 welfare flag reports, each less than a page, each stamped at the top with the same phrase in ministry typeface. Closed. No action required. In the margin of the 3rd stamp, handwritten over the official text, in what she was already noting as a different ink, per Minister's Office. Circumstances exceptional. Do not escalate. She read the flag reports from the beginning. The first had been filed before the 1990 standardization of AMRS paperwork, which placed it before the summer of 1991 without giving an exact date. The Accidental Magic Reversal Squad attendee had been dispatched to 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, following a registered magical incident in the vicinity of a juvenile wizard. The observation section read, "Child presents with indicators of malnourishment. Clothing consistent with hand-me-downs of a significantly larger person. Emotional affect restricted. Housing appears inconsistent with appropriate provision for a child demonstrating magical aptitude." 7 lines. The 2nd flag had been filed in August 1992, the same address, following a hover charm detection. The AMRS attendee had been more thorough, or perhaps more disturbed. Child housed in a room recently converted from a storage space beneath the household staircase. No age-appropriate clothing, no personal belongings of note. A padlock is affixed to the outside of the child's door. She stopped. A padlock on the outside of the door. She read the sentence again. Not a latch. A padlock. She picked up her quill and put it back down, and read the sentence a third time, because she wanted to be very certain about what it said. It said what it said. She continued. The third flag was the most recent, dated 7 days ago, following an incident in which a muggle had been inflated by a juvenile wizard and subsequently memory-modified and returned to normal. The AMRS field notes appended to the back of the form were the most detailed of the three. Child approximately 13 years of age, thin for his age, wearing what appear to be adult-sized second-hand garments, several sizes too large. Child found outside the property address at approximately 9 in the evening without adult supervision, in possession of a school trunk, an owl in its cage, and a wand. Child identified as H.J. Potter. Notable scar on forehead, consistent with records. She set the file on her desk and sat with it. Then she called for a record search on the closure authorizations. This was a standard DMLE request. Her clerk had the full routing history on her desk within 20 minutes. Closure 1. The flag had been submitted through the AMRS post-incident report chain, forwarded per standard protocol to St. Mungo's Admissions Welfare Register, and from there flagged for DMLE review. At which point, rather than arriving on a DMLE investigator's desk for the review the protocol required, it had been returned to the reporting chain with a closure instruction. The instruction carried a reference note from the improper use of magic office, indicating that the IUMO had passed the flag further up and received a return directive to close without review. The IUMO had complied. No named DMLE investigator had been assigned. No written determination had been made. Closure 2. The same mechanism. Exactly. IUMO forwarded. Instruction received. File closed. Closure 3. The minister's office stamp she had already seen in the file, written into the margin by whoever had handled it at the ministerial level. In 12 years and 3 flags, the standard process, a welfare concern routed to the DMLE required a named investigator, a reviewed determination, and a signed closure, had not been followed once. Not because the protocol had not existed, because someone, at each stage, had received an instruction and complied. She considered the file for some time. She was not unaware of what H.J. Potter meant to the wizarding world. The boy who had survived a killing curse as an infant in 1981, whose name every witch and wizard in Britain had known before he was old enough to walk. He was 13 now, staying at the Leaky Cauldron under the minister's own permission, following the Marge Dursley incident, which meant the minister had encountered the boy's situation in the last 2 weeks and had still not reviewed the closure record. She was also aware that the Dursley placement had not been a random assignment. The Hogwarts headmaster had arranged it. None of this was a reason to close the file. She reached for her stamp. DMLE inquiry open. Investigator assigned. Then she took a sheet of ministry correspondence parchment and wrote the letter herself rather than dictating it, because this was not a letter she intended to delegate. It was addressed to the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It stated, in the formal language appropriate to the opening of a DMLE inquiry, that a welfare concern had been raised and reviewed regarding a minor currently enrolled at Hogwarts, that the concern had been found substantive, and that the inquiry required his availability to discuss the arrangement under which Harry James Potter had been placed with the Dursley family at 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. She signed it. She sealed it with the inquiry mark. She handed it to her owl and watched it go. The H.J. Potter file went into the tray marked Open Inquiries. She returned to the black sighting report she had been reading when the St. Mungo's parcel arrived. The sighting was from Liverpool, overnight. The description was plausible. She marked it for follow-up and moved to the next. She was fair. She was strict. She had, over the course of her career, closed a great many files because the majority of files were closed correctly, and most of the work she did was the unspectacular work of a system that functioned. This file had not been closed correctly. It had not been reviewed correctly at any of the 3 stages at which it should have been reviewed. A healer at St. Mungo's who had never met Harry Potter had read the flag reports and done what the DMLE had not done in 12 years, which was to consider what those reports said and decline to stamp them closed. She did not spend time on what this would mean politically. She would spend time on that when she had to, and she would have to soon enough. For now she had 42 remaining black sightings to work through, and a formal inquiry open on the corner of her desk, and the morning was not yet finished. The Ministry Owl arrived in the early afternoon, dropping a sealed letter on Dumbledore's desk and departing without waiting for a response, which was one way to know that the letter had not come from anyone who wanted an answer quickly. He finished the sentence he was writing, set down his quill, and opened it. The letter was from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. It was formal in the way that ministry correspondence was formal when something substantive was happening. Not the rote courtesy of a routing notification, but the considered language of a document that had been drafted by someone who knew it would be read carefully and wanted to make certain they had said what they meant. A welfare inquiry had been opened regarding Harry James Potter. A welfare concern had been raised, reviewed, and found substantive. The inquiry requested his availability at his earliest convenience to discuss the placement arrangement. He read it to the end. He set it on the desk. He looked at it. He was not surprised. He had known, with the particular knowledge of a very old man who has constructed a thing and watched it hold, and watched it hold, and waited for the moment when it would not hold, that this was possible. A welfare flag, some years ago, and then another. The closures he had been informed of. The arrangement that had relied on the ministry's willingness to be managed, and on Harry's continued ignorance of why he was where he was, and on the Dursleys' willingness to be exactly what they had always been. He had built a protection that was also a cage, and he had called the cage necessary, and it had been necessary, and he had known this day would come eventually. He read the letter again. On the perch near the window, Fawkes the Phoenix turned his scarlet head very slightly and regarded him with one gold eye. Dumbledore did not speak to the bird. He set the letter down a second time and looked at the fire. The portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses lined the walls around him, most of them dozing in the late afternoon quiet of an office that had seen the summer without students. 2 or 3 observed him with the mild, alert curiosity of people who had nothing to do but observe. He did not speak to them either. There was nothing to say to them about this that was not, in one form or another, something they already knew. The letter sat on his desk. He was 112 years old. He had received the welfare flag reports at one remove. The closures had been handled by others. But he had known what the ministry had known, and he had known what the Dursleys were, because he had placed Harry there knowing what they were, and had called it protection. He had made a very great many decisions. He needed to think clearly. The bond of blood charm required 2 things. First, that Harry return to Petunia Dursley's house at least once a year. Second, that Harry be able to call it home. Both conditions had to be satisfied for the protection to hold. As long as they were, Voldemort, wherever he was, whatever form that diminished and persistent thing currently occupied, could not harm Harry on those premises, or through a direct reach that the blood magic would deflect. If the DMLE's inquiry concluded that Harry could not be required to return to Privet Drive, the first condition might eventually fail. If it had already been satisfied this summer, and Harry had been there, however briefly, before the Marge incident, then the first condition was met for this year. But the inquiry would address next year and the year after, and whether returning once annually under compulsion satisfied the charm's requirement, or whether the charm's architecture demanded something more genuine than compliance. The second condition was the harder question. The charm was anchored in love. Lily's sacrifice had created the protection, and Petunia's blood had anchored it, and the condition required Harry to be able to call Petunia's house his home. If what the house had offered for 12 years was not home, but its opposite, and if the charm's second condition had been degrading from the first year of resentful compliance, then the argument Dumbledore had made for 12 years rested on something that might already have failed. He had not examined that closely. He was examining it now. He could not tell the Ministry about the bond of blood. To explain it fully was to explain Lily's sacrifice and the architecture of what had happened in Godric's Hollow in 1981, which led inescapably to things he wasn't prepared to discuss with the Ministry, things Harry didn't yet know and wasn't yet ready to know. He could not explain the full necessity. He wouldn't try. He sent a message through the castle. Snape arrived in under the hour, which was how he always arrived, without ceremony, in black robes that moved with him as though they were part of the same continuous decision, his expression already composed into the particular neutrality he kept for conversations where something was wrong that he had expected to be wrong and was waiting to be told the precise shape of it. He sat in the chair on the other side of the desk without being asked. Dumbledore held out the letter. Snape read it without expression. He read it at the pace of someone reading carefully, not at the pace of someone trying to appear to read carefully, which was a distinction Dumbledore had learned to notice. He set the letter down on the desk between them. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Not, I warned you." "Not, I am surprised." "Not, how did this happen?" "I need to know," Dumbledore said, "whether there is a means of preserving the blood protection that does not require Harry's permanent residence at Privet Drive. Something that could hold the essential anchor, the blood magic, Petunia's acceptance, while permitting Harry to live somewhere else for the majority of the year." Snape looked at him steadily. The firelight did not do much to warm his expression, which was the kind of expression that had decided not to give anything away until it had all the relevant information. "The charm's architecture," Snape said. "You are more familiar with blood anchor magic than most. I am asking for your assessment." A pause. The fire shifted. Fawkes rearranged himself on his perch. "I will assess it," Snape said. He did not say, "I believe it is possible." He did not say, "I believe it is impossible." He said he would assess it with the precision of a man who did not commit to conclusions he had not reached, and picked up the letter and read it a second time. "The inquiry's scope. Have they indicated a timeline?" "No." "Then I have time." He set the letter back on the desk. He stood. The conversation had reached its boundary, and he had located it exactly. "I'll send the report through the usual channel." He left. The door did not quite close behind him. Dumbledore sat alone. He pulled 2 sheets of parchment from the desk drawer and dipped his quill. The first letter took very little time. It was addressed to the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and it acknowledged receipt of the DMLE notification, and it stated that the inquiry was welcome to proceed with the full cooperation of this office. He signed it, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Order of Merlin First Class, and sealed it with the school's mark for the outgoing owl post. The second letter was more difficult. He wrote the salutation, "Dear Harry," and then sat with the quill resting in his hand for some time. He had a great deal to say. He had not, in 12 years, said most of it. Not, "I knew what the house was." Not, "I made this choice deliberately, knowing its cost." He had not said any of it, because Harry had not asked, and there had not yet been a reason compelling enough to require him to. There was a reason now. He wrote 3 sentences. He crossed out the first one. He wrote another, and then set the quill down and folded the letter and placed it on the corner of the desk. He would need to think carefully about what it said. Outside the window, the grounds of Hogwarts lay quiet in the late August afternoon. No students yet. The castle always felt different in August, not empty, because it was never truly empty, but waiting, which was a different quality. Fawkes watched him with the patient attention of a creature that had seen a great many moments like this one, and understood them to be necessary. Dumbledore looked at the letter addressed to Harry. He did not send it. Not yet. He approached it the way he approached everything, as a problem with a structure that could be located if one applied sufficient rigor. The bond of blood charm, sacrificial protection, blood anchor architecture. He pulled everything he had, his own annotated texts from his years as a student and a teacher, 2 volumes from the restricted section that he had signed out under his own authority, and carried down to his study without explanation, a monograph on the theory of willing sacrifice charms that had been published by a St. Mungo's research division in 1977, and was largely unknown because it had been published by a St. Mungo's research division in 1977, and no one had thought to look for it there. He laid them out on the workbench, which was not technically a research surface. It was where he prepared potions, but which had a flat area at one end that served well enough. The dungeons in August were cool and still. No students. The torches along the corridor outside his door had been turned low for the summer, so the only light in the study was the pair of lamps on either end of the workbench and the low amber of the fire in the grate. It suited him. He worked better without ambient noise, and August at Hogwarts was the closest the castle came to silence. He started with the established mechanics of blood anchor charms generally, before moving to the specific. Blood anchor charms were relatively rare in post-medieval magic because the conditions for their creation were restrictive. They required a willing act of sacrifice rather than a compelled one, and the magic generated by such an act was both more powerful and more unpredictable than most practitioners found manageable. The restricted section held 6 texts on the subject. 2 of them were credible. He annotated as he read, in the narrow, precise hand he used for professional notes. The specific charm Dumbledore had used in October 1981 was not precisely documented anywhere Snape had been able to find. What was documented was its general family. Sacrificial protection, the kind created by an act of voluntary, loving self-offering in defense of another, produced a protection that attached to blood, rather than to location or to person. It was the blood that mattered. Harry shared Lily's blood, and Petunia shared Lily's blood, and the charm had been set into the Dursley household by Dumbledore's letter and Petunia's act of opening the door and taking the child in. The protection had been seeded into the family connection, such as it was. Such as it was. He set down his quill. Her name was in everything he read. It was not that he had not known this would be the case. He had understood, when Dumbledore handed him the letter and asked what he could do, that this was the work he was being given. That was why he had said yes. Because it was her work, in the sense that mattered. The mechanics he was tracing were her mechanics. The charm's architecture was the architecture of what she had done. Lily Evans, Lily Potter. He had known her at school, had known her for years, and then not known her. And then, in October 1981, she had died rather than step aside. She had died for the boy. She had made herself a willing barrier, and the magic of that willing had attached to her blood, and her child, and the charm Dumbledore had seeded, had grown from it. And somewhere inside the architecture of the Dursley household, her love was the structural material. He picked up the quill. The charm's first condition was the simpler one to assess. Harry must return to Petunia Dursley's house at least once a year. This was a physical requirement, observable, verifiable, and Dumbledore had satisfied it for 12 years without difficulty. If the DMLE's inquiry concluded that Harry could not be required to return, the first condition would eventually fail. But annual return alone was necessary, not sufficient. The second condition was harder. The charm required, and here the texts were consistent with each other in a way that felt significant, that Harry be able to call Petunia's house his home. Not that he prefer it, not that it be comfortable, but that it be home in the sense the magic understood home, a place of belonging, of being wanted, of the person in whose blood the charm was anchored, having accepted the child as family. Snape had read the DMLE letter carefully. 3 welfare flags, physical indicators of malnourishment, a padlock on the outside of a bedroom door, clothing many sizes too large, a boy found outside at 9 in the evening with no adult supervision. He was a potions master. He assessed what the evidence indicated. What it indicated was that Petunia Dursley had accepted Harry the way she might accept a condition she could not change, with resentment and compliance, and no particular warmth, not love. Nothing that approached love. The acceptance of a woman who had been asked, by a long letter left on a doorstep, to open her door to a child she did not want, who represented a world she had spent 30 years trying to close out of her life, who was also her dead sister's son. And she had opened the door, and that was the sum total of what she had offered. The charm was built on love. If Petunia Dursley had not loved Harry, had not, in any year of the 12, felt anything toward him that the magic could plausibly recognize as care, then the second condition might not have been met from the first year. The protection might have been weaker than Dumbledore believed, not broken. The fact that Harry was alive and unhurt across 12 summers argued that something had held. But weakened, degrading. The full strength of Lily's sacrifice might have been slowly attenuating in an environment that could not sustain it, the way a potion loses potency if kept in the wrong conditions. He could not prove this. He had no means of measuring the charm's current strength directly. No instrument existed for it, as far as he knew. His assessment was theoretical, derived from the texts he had read, and the conditions the welfare report described, and the logic of what blood anchor magic required to remain vital. He wrote that explicitly at the top of the report. This is conjecture. Assessment derived from established theory of sacrificial protection and the documented conditions of the placement. Conclusions cannot be confirmed without either direct measurement of the charm's current state or canonical documentation of the anchor holder's acceptance, neither of which I have access to. Then he wrote the rest. It took him an hour. The fire had died down by the time he set the quill aside and reviewed what he had written. He read it through once, corrected 2 phrasings that were less precise than he wanted, and then rolled the parchment and sealed it with his personal mark, and went upstairs to leave it with the stone gargoyle that guarded Dumbledore's office. He came back downstairs. The study was quiet and dim. He stood in it for a moment. If he cast his Patronus now, which he would not, because there was no Dementor present and no reason, it would be the same as it had always been. Since the first time he had managed the charm, the year after she died, when he had been 22 years old and had stood in this study, or one very like it, and needed to know whether he could still produce one at all, a doe, silver and luminous and shaped like the Patronus she had produced when she was 15, in a defense against the dark arts practice session in a courtyard in March, when she had laughed at the shape of it and said she wasn't sure what it meant. He knew what it meant. He had known since 1981. It meant the only thing it could mean. He sat down at the workbench and looked at the notes he had made, the mechanics of her sacrifice, the architecture of what she had done with her death, which was the most powerful piece of magic he had ever read about, and which had been used for 12 years to justify a padlock on the outside of a door in Surrey. He thought about her, briefly, because there was no other way to think about her. Prolonged thought of that kind was not something he permitted himself. And then he stopped, because there was nothing to be done with it, because she was dead, because the boy was alive, which was what she had wanted, and the boy's file was now at the ministry, and he had done what he could do. He banked the fire. He went to bed. He bought his potions ingredients at the apothecary. He bought the standard book of spells, grade 3 at Flourish and Blots, and the home life and social habits of British muggles he was going to need for care of magical creatures, or whatever that turned out to be, given that Hagrid was teaching it, and the monster book of monsters, which had tried to take a chunk out of his hand at the counter, until the bookseller had shown him how to stroke its spine to keep it still. He bought 2 new quills and a fresh bottle of black ink. He counted his change without much trouble, because he had been making careful amounts of money stretch for as long as he could remember, and this was simply the other direction of the same skill. He was buying a replacement for his sneakerscope at a shop near the entrance to the alley when he heard it. A sound like a small, localized argument about cauldrons, conducted at a volume that suggested the people involved did not particularly care who else could hear. He went around the corner and found the Weasleys. There were a great many of them, which was always the first impression. Ron was there, and Ginny, and Fred and George still arguing about the cauldrons with the comfortable venom of people who had been arguing about this specific thing for some time and weren't ready to stop, and Percy standing a short distance away, wearing his prefect badge and an expression of patient suffering that suggested he was not about to get involved, but needed everyone to know he disapproved. Arthur Weasley stood at the edge of the group, holding a collection of school bags, and looking at a muggle shopfront across the street with the particular alert happiness of a man who has just spotted something he needs to ask about. And the Weasley matriarch, short and rather plump, with the same vivid red hair as all her children, and the voice of someone who had learned to be heard across a full kitchen from across any distance, was telling Fred and George exactly what they were and were not going to do with their potions equipment. Harry stopped on the corner and watched them for a moment before any of them noticed him. He did not have very good words for what the Weasley family was like up close. He had a vocabulary for quiet. He had a vocabulary for meals that were given to him when he had earned them and withheld when he hadn't. He did not have a word for what it was to be somewhere this loud and have it mean nothing was wrong. "Harry!" Ron had spotted him. He was grinning the way Ron grinned when something had genuinely improved his day, rather than when he was trying to appear cheerful, which was an important distinction. He broke away from the group and crossed the cobblestones with the slightly loping walk of someone whose legs had recently grown faster than the rest of him had adjusted to. "You're here," Ron said, which was the kind of sentence that was not profound, but conveyed exactly what it meant. "How long have you been here?" "Few weeks," Harry said. "How was Egypt?" "Brilliant. Well, hot. Very hot. Bill showed us the tomb he's been working on. There were these cursed flesh-eating slugs in the antechamber. It was excellent." Ron paused. "You all right?" "Yeah," Harry said. This was technically true. He had a room, a lock he could use from the inside, money, warm food, free hours, and nothing requiring him to be afraid of the people he was living near. He was as all right as he had been in any summer he could remember. He just could not figure out a way to say that which did not sound strange. So he said, "Yeah," and left it there. They spent the afternoon together, in the comfortable, disorganized way of the Weasley family's shopping trips, which moved between shops according to a logic Harry could not quite identify, but which seemed to involve the matriarch's list, and Fred and George's ability to find distractions and occasional contributions from Arthur Weasley about things he had seen in Muggle London on the way here. It was Arthur who made Harry laugh, because Arthur always made Harry laugh eventually. He had slipped across to the Muggle street long enough to go into a newsagent's and ask the man at the counter, with the transparent delight of someone who genuinely needed to know whether the electronic till communicated via aerial or whether there were wires. Harry had been near enough to hear Arthur's follow-up questions about batteries and had stood in the entrance of the leaky cauldron, laughing until he had to hold on to the doorframe. "He does this everywhere," Ron said, at his elbow, with the exasperated affection of someone who has been doing this everywhere with his father for 13 years and had given up finding it embarrassing. "I know," Harry said. He did not say, "This is the best thing I have seen all summer." He did not say, "The best thing about this is that it is entirely genuine, that he is not performing the interest in batteries, that he is actually delighted by the existence of batteries in a way that I have never seen anyone be delighted by anything in the house I grew up in." He did not say any of it. He watched the Weasley matriarch shepherd Fred and George back into the alley with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing exactly this for 15 years and had no illusions about the difficulty of the task. He watched Ginny argue with Ron about something that became unimportant before it was finished, the way arguments between the two of them tended to resolve. He watched Percy hold the door for Arthur with a dignified graciousness that was meant to demonstrate something about the correct way to behave in public. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. Not for long. It was not a thing he spent extended time thinking about, by preference. But it was there, briefly, because the Weasley family was right in front of him, and the contrast had a particular quality when they were right in front of him. The cupboard, the mattress, the particular silence of a house that was quiet because he was supposed to be quiet in it, the meals that had been sufficient to keep him alive and insufficient in most other senses. He had spent 11 years in that house, not knowing that money existed with his name on it. He had spent 11 years not knowing what dinner with a family could sound like. He had never told Ron about the cupboard. He had never told Ron about any of it, because telling Ron would have required him to know how to tell it, and he did not know how to tell it in a way that didn't make it something different from what it had been. It had been his life. He had lived it. The words for it were still developing. He did not know that someone had already written it down. "See you on the 1st, Ron said, when the Weasleys were gathering themselves to go. "You're taking the train?" "Yeah," Harry said. "Right." Ron punched him on the arm, which was Ron's standard affectionate farewell. "Don't do anything brilliant before September." Harry watched them go, all of them at once, which was what the Weasleys did. The whole mass of red hair and argument and shopping bags, until they had turned the corner and were gone. And the alley where they had been was a perfectly ordinary alley again, occupied by strangers moving between shops in the late afternoon. He stood in it for a moment, He had a week before the 1st of September. He had a room at the Leaky Cauldron with a lock he could use from the inside, and enough money and warm food, and no one who required him to be afraid of them. He was, technically, fine. He went back to the Leaky Cauldron. Somewhere in Scotland, in an office, high in a castle that was empty for the summer, a letter sat on the corner of a desk. It had been written and folded, and set there and not sent. It had been sitting on that corner of that desk for several days, and was likely to sit there for several more, while the person who had written it tried to work out exactly what it should say. Harry did not know about the letter. He went upstairs and read his monster book of monsters, which had escaped from his bag and was attempting to eat his pillowcase, and outside the window, the late August light came at Diagon Alley, at the particular angle it always came, in late August, and it was almost September. The Ministry of Magic visitor entrance was a red telephone box on a London street, which told you something about the Ministry's sense of humour, or lack of it. The healer dialed 622442 and felt the box drop into the ground, and emerged into the atrium a few minutes later in the precise condition she had been dreading, slightly disoriented and immediately aware that she was not dressed for this. She was in her lime green healer's robes. St. Mungo's staff wore lime green because lime green was visible from a distance and therefore practical in a hospital setting. In the ministry atrium, which ran to peacock blue and polished gold, and the kind of stern institutional grandeur that communicated seriousness of purpose in every architectural detail, lime green made her look like a lost houseplant. She showed her wand at the security desk and was given a visitor badge that said, "Healer, formal interview," and she went, with the badge on her robes and the file under her arm and the routing note tucked inside the file to the lifts. Level 2, the badge said. Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The DMLE offices were different from the atrium. The atrium was grand. The DMLE was functional. Long corridors, doors with plaques, the subdued sound of people doing administrative work behind closed surfaces. The carpet was a darker blue than the atrium floor. The torches here were the standard ministry variety, not charmed to flicker warmly, just lit. She was escorted by a clerk who said nothing and left her alone with a room containing a table, 2 chairs on one side and one on the other, a transcription quill in its stand, and nothing else that softened it. She sat down and put the file on the table in front of her, and waited. The head of the DMLA arrived 8 minutes later. 8 minutes that the healer spent reading the routing note she had written 2 weeks ago, because it was there, and because she wanted to remember exactly what she had written and why. She looked up when the door opened. The head of the DMLE was precisely what the healer had expected from the description she had been given, in the way that very few people were what you expected. A compact, square-jawed woman with short grey hair and the expression of someone who had heard a great many things said to her in rooms like this one and had learned to receive them without altering her face. She sat down across the table, opened a folder of her own, and looked at the healer steadily. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We will record your statement." She indicated the transcription quill, which began to move at the word record. "If you are ready." "Yes," the healer said. "Please describe, in your own words, the circumstances under which you received the file of H.J. Potter and the decision you made regarding its disposition." So the healer did. She described the Monday morning, the welfare closures stacked in the ministry pouch, the thermos in the bottom drawer, the routine she had built across 3 years in her role at St. Mungo's admissions. She described finding the file partway through the stack. She described reading the routing note on top, the small, careful handwriting that had sent her the file, and then opening it. Then she read from the 3 flag reports aloud, as the head of the DMLA had asked, and the transcription quill moved steadily beside her, and the words she had read alone in her office 2 weeks ago went into the record. The first flag: child presence with indicators of malnourishment, clothing consistent with hand-me-downs of a significantly larger person, emotional affect restricted, housing appears inconsistent with appropriate provision for a child demonstrating magical aptitude. The second flag: child housed in a room recently converted from a storage space beneath the household staircase. No age-appropriate clothing, no personal belongings of note. A padlock is affixed to the outside of the child's door. She paused. In her own office, reading it for the first time, she had stopped at that sentence. She stopped again now, briefly, before continuing. The third flag: child approximately 13 years of age, thin for his age, wearing adult-sized second-hand garments, several sizes too large. Child found outside the property address at approximately 9 in the evening, without adult supervision, in possession of a school trunk, an owl in its cage, and a wand. She looked up. The transcription quill continued to move for a moment, completing the last line. The head of the DMLE's expression had not changed. She wrote something in her own notes, and then asked, "Walk me through what happened to each flag after it was submitted." The interview was the head of the DMLE's from here. She listened, but she had already drawn the same lines the healer was drawing now. She had done the record search a week ago, and the routing told her nothing she had not already mapped. The first flag: AMRA's post-incident report, forwarded to St. Mungo's admissions register, flagged for DMLE welfare review, then returned to the AMRS reporting chain with a closure instruction. The instruction bore a reference from the improper use of magic office, indicating the IUMO had forwarded the flag further and received a directive back. Close. The IUMO had complied. No DMLE investigator had been assigned. No written determination had been produced. The second flag: same mechanism, same result. The third flag: the minister's office stamp with the marginal note. She wrote. She did not indicate, as the healer walked through the routing, that she had already charted every one of these steps herself. The healer's account was for the record. It was for the transcript that would sit in the docket of this inquiry, and that would be, if it came to that, and she believed it would come to that, a document that no one could subsequently claim had not existed. "Why didn't you close the third flag as the notation instructed?" she asked, when the healer had finished. The healer looked at her. Not nervously now. She had lost the nervous quality somewhere in the reading of the second flag report. "Because the instruction wasn't documented through standard protocol," she said, "and because the file had been closed twice before without a single follow-up visit to the child. And because I read what those 3 reports said, and I could not write 'no action required' on them." The transcription quill moved. The head of the DMLE wrote the same words in her own notes, in her own handwriting, because there were things you wrote down twice. She asked, had St. Mungo's ever cross-referenced the child's welfare file against his school records? The healer said she had checked. There was no cross-reference. The 3 AMRS flags were the complete record held at the hospital. She asked, had the AMRS members who filed the flags ever conducted a follow-up visit to the child? The healer said she had looked for documentation of any such visit. There was none. In 12 years and 3 flag submissions, no follow-up visit had been made by any AMR's team member, or, as far as the file showed, by anyone else from any ministry department. The room was quiet for a moment, except for the transcription quill. "Thank you," the head of the DMLE said. You'll receive a copy of your transcript for review within 3 working days. We may contact you with further questions." The healer left. The head of the DMLE listened to her footsteps recede down the corridor, and then sat with the open docket in the quiet of the interview room and let herself think. What she had in front of her was this: 3 welfare flag reports filed over 12 years by ministry-employed AMR's attendees, each one containing clinical observations about a child in conditions that would have required investigation under any standard welfare protocol. 3 closure instructions, none of which had been processed through the standard DMLE review channel. 2 routed through the IUMO with what was effectively a bypass instruction. 1 routed directly through the minister's office with a notation that said, "In plain ministry language, do not look at this," and not 1 follow-up visit in 12 years to the child at the address. She picked up her quill. The second letter to the headmaster of Hogwarts was shorter than the first. It did not use the phrase, "requests your availability." It stated that the inquiry required his attendance at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement for a formal meeting, to be scheduled at his earliest convenience, and that the matters to be discussed concerned the arrangement under which H.J. Potter had been placed at 4 Privet Drive, and the documentation of that arrangement as it existed in the Ministry's welfare register. She sealed it. She sent it. Then she opened the docket to a fresh page and began preparing the questions she intended to ask Albus Dumbledore when he came. He was reading when the knock came, or trying to read. The Monster Book of Monsters had been restless since morning, and kept testing the belt he had fastened around its cover, and he had been keeping half an eye on it, and losing his place in the Defense Against the Dark Arts text every few minutes, so he was technically reading in the sense that his eyes were on the page. When the knock came, he set both books aside with the relief of someone who has been given a legitimate reason to stop. He opened the door. Dumbledore was there. Harry's first thought, in the flat and immediate way that first thoughts were not considered. Something has happened. Because Dumbledore did not come to him. In 3 years, Dumbledore had sent letters and occasionally spoken to him through intermediaries, and had been present at the moments in Harry's life when being present was unavoidable. But he had not knocked on Harry's door. The fact of him standing in the corridor of the Leaky Cauldron in his travelling robes, tall and silver-haired, and looking at Harry across the threshold with an expression that was not the usual warmth, meant something was wrong. "May I come in?" Dumbledore said. Harry stepped back. The room was not large. Dumbledore sat in the single wooden chair near the window, and Harry sat on the bed, which was the only other surface, and Hedwig watched from her cage on the desk with the solemn attention of an owl who understood more than she was given credit for. Dumbledore did not arrange himself into his usual comfortable presence. He folded his hands on his knee and looked at Harry directly, and the half-moon spectacles on his nose caught the afternoon light coming through the window, and the expression behind them was something Harry had not seen on Dumbledore before, which was the expression of someone who has arrived at a place they knew they would eventually arrive at, and had not found it easier for the anticipating. "There is a welfare inquiry," Dumbledore said, "open at the Ministry of Magic concerning your living arrangements at your aunt and uncle's home in Little Whinging. It was opened by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement approximately 10 days ago, following a welfare flag submitted by a healer at St. Mungo's Hospital. I was notified of the inquiry 3 days ago. I am here because you will be formally notified shortly, and I would rather you hear this from me first." He said it clearly and completely, the way someone said a thing they had rehearsed enough to say well. Harry listened to all of it. "You've known for 3 days," Harry said. "Yes." Harry looked at him. Dumbledore did not look away. "All right," Harry said. "What's a welfare inquiry?" So Dumbledore explained it. the AMRS attendees, and the flag reports, the 3 flags over 12 years, the healer at St. Mungo's who had read the 3rd flag and not closed it. He explained it without any softening that suggested he thought Harry needed the fact softened, which Harry was grateful for, even as he was listening to the facts and understanding what they were. 3 welfare flag reports, a padlock on his door, a room that had been a cupboard, written down by ministry officials who had been to the house in the right-sized ministry language, and then closed. 3 times. Closed, and then not closed. Someone had read it and not closed it. Why were they closed before? Harry said. That is part of what the inquiry is examining, Dumbledore said. I will say, and I am telling you this because you deserve to know it fully, and because what I have to tell you next will not make sense without it, that I was aware the flags existed. I did not receive them directly, but I was aware, and I did not pursue them. I made choices about what I pursued and what I did not. The room was very quiet. Hedwig ruffled her feathers and was still. I have to tell you, Dumbledore said, about your mother. He told Harry about Lily Potter's sacrifice, the choice she had made in a house in Godric's Hollow on the 31st of October in 1981, to stand between Voldemort and her son and refuse to move. He explained what that choice had done, the magic it had created, the protection it had woven into Harry's blood, the charm Dumbledore had then anchored to the Dursley household by placing Harry there, and by writing to Petunia Dursley and asking her to take her sister's son in. The bond of blood. As long as Harry could call Petunia's house his home and returned to it, the protection held. As long as it held, Voldemort could not reach Harry on those premises, or through the particular reach that blood magic deflected, his mother's love, encoded into the conditions of a house in Surrey, and renewed each time Harry came back and called it home. Harry listened to all of this too. I knew, Dumbledore said, when he had finished, that the conditions at your aunt and uncle's home were not what I would have wished. I made the arrangement knowing that, and I believed, I chose to believe, that your safety required it, that the protection was worth the cost. I did not tell you, because you were too young to be told, and then you were older, and the habit of not telling you had established itself, and that was wrong. He said that was wrong, with the precise simplicity of someone who had thought carefully about the sentence before they said it and had decided not to dress it up. Harry looked at him. He was 13 years old, sitting on a bed in the leaky cauldron with his books on either side of him, and Hedwig watching from the corner, and the man he had trusted most in the world had just told him, in organized and careful language, that he had known and had chosen and had called it necessary. He did not shout. There was nothing in him that wanted to shout. What was in him was quieter than that, and more total. He asked, "Did my mum know what her sister was like?" Dumbledore paused. The pause was not very long, but it was long enough to be a pause. They had not been close for many years, he said. Harry nodded. He looked at the window. The afternoon light was still coming through it. There was noise from the common room 3 floors below, the ordinary sound of the leaky cauldron at mid-afternoon. "Okay," Harry said. He meant none of what okay sounded like. He meant something more like, I have heard this, and I am putting it somewhere, and I am not finished with it. Something about his mother choosing to die for him, and the death being turned into a key that locked him into a house where he was not wanted, which was a thing he would need to think about for a long time before he understood all of it. "Okay," he said again. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "There are practical matters I need you to understand. The bond of blood requires two things: that you return to Petunia's house at least once a year, and that you be able to call it home. If the DMLE determines you cannot be required to return, the first condition may eventually fail. If either condition fails, the protection breaks. What that means practically. Voldemort can find me, Harry said. Yes. Harry had known this in the abstract, the way he knew most things about Voldemort. As fact, distant and terrible, something that bore on his life without quite touching the day-to-day of it. He knew it more precisely now. I'm not doing it for him, Harry said. If I go back, if I do the once a year or whatever, it's not for him. I would not suggest otherwise. I just wanted to say it. Dumbledore nodded. He did not say, I understand. He did not say, of course. He simply nodded, which was better. He left a few minutes later. Harry did not see him to the door. He sat in the room after Dumbledore had gone. The afternoon continued. The monster book made a low, grumbling sound and subsided against the belt. Hedwig turned on her perch and tucked her head under her wing. Harry thought about his mother. She had been born on the 30th of January in 1960 and died on the 31st of October in 1981, which meant she had been 21 years old when she chose what she chose. He was 13. He did not know if 13 was old enough to understand what 21 and choosing to die for your child felt like from the inside. He did not think it was. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about the file at St. Mungo's. He had not known, until 8 minutes ago, that it existed. A file with his name on the front and 3 flag reports inside. And someone had read it and not closed it. And because she hadn't closed it, he was now sitting in this room being told things Dumbledore had known for 12 years. He did not know yet how to feel about that. He thought it was probably something. He sat in the room and let the afternoon go by, and did not try to decide what it was. The phone box on Whitehall smelled like a phone box, metal and stale air, and the particular quality of a small enclosed space that got a great deal of use. Harry dialed 622-44422 on the keypad and felt the floor drop away beneath him with the smooth inevitability of something that was accustomed to doing this, and saw no reason to be dramatic about it. A badge materialized in the coin slot. Harry Potter. Witness, it said. He pinned it to his robes and followed the floor to the Ministry of Magic. The atrium was enormous, a vaulted ministry blue ceiling, polished dark floors, a fountain of golden figures at the center that poured water into a gleaming basin, while witches and wizards moved past it with the walk of people who were somewhere they went every day. A security guard recorded his wand at a desk near the entrance, matter of fact, and a ministry clerk took him to the lifts without preamble. Level 2. The clerk left him in an interview room, a table, 2 chairs on one side, and one on the other, a transcription quill, and he sat down and waited. The head of the DMLE arrived exactly on time, which he had the sense was a thing she did reliably. Mr. Potter. She sat down across from him. The transcription quill was there, in its stand. She looked at him with the fair, direct attention that did not perform anything. Before we begin, there is something I would like to show you. You are not required to read it. You may choose to. She placed a thin file on the table and turned it so it faced him. H.J. Potter. His own name, in ministry typeface, on a manila cover that was thinner than he would have expected for 12 years of anything. Take as long as you need, she said, and sat back. He opened it. The first page was less than a page. It was a form, an AMRS incident report, the formatting the ministry used for accidental magic reversal squad call-outs. the kind he had learned about when Dumbledore explained the 3 flags. The observation section was 7 lines. He read them. Child presents with indicators of malnourishment. Clothing consistent with hand-me-downs of a significantly larger person. Emotional affect restricted. Housing appears inconsistent with appropriate provision for a child demonstrating magical aptitude. He read it twice. He was trying to locate himself in the language, the way you tried to locate yourself in a photograph taken when you were very small. Not recognition exactly, more the awareness that the subject and you share a continuous history, even if you cannot feel the bridge across it. The second page, child housed in a room recently converted from a storage space beneath the household staircase. No age-appropriate clothing, no personal belongings of note. A padlock is affixed to the outside of the child's door. He stopped. He read the sentence about the padlock again. It was strange to read it. He knew the padlock. He had lived with the padlock. He had heard the particular sound of it being slid across from the outside more times than he had counted. In ministry typeface, on a form that had been written and filed and closed and left to sit in a cabinet at St. Mungo's Hospital for several years, it looked like something different. It looked like something that had been noticed. The third page, child approximately 13 years of age, thin for his age, wearing adult-sized second-hand garments, several sizes too large. Child found outside the property address at approximately 9 in the evening, without adult supervision, in possession of a school trunk, an owl in its cage, and a wand. Child identified as H.J. Potter. Notable scar on forehead, consistent with records. He closed the file. "Ready?" the head of the DMLE said. "Yes," Harry said. She did not express sympathy. She did not express anything except the precise professional attention of someone conducting a formal inquiry. When he looked back on this conversation later, he would understand that the absence of performance was a form of respect. She was not going to tell him how to feel about his own answers. "Describe," she said, "your bedroom at 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging." So he described it. He described the cupboard first, because the cupboard was first. The mattress. The dimensions. Small enough that he had been unable to stand upright when he was 9. The shelf above the mattress, where his aunt stored tins. A spider that had lived in the corner for 2 years, which he had named because it was the closest thing he had to a companion in the space. The camp cot that came eventually, when he outgrew the mattress. The door, and the way the lock worked. The transcription quill moved. He described the bedroom he had been moved to in the summer before he started at Hogwarts, Dudley's second bedroom, the one that had been used for Dudley's overflow of broken toys. The smallest bedroom in the house. He described the differences. A real bed, a window, a lock still on the outside but less frequently used. He described what he had in it. His school things eventually, and Hedwig's cage. The way his aunt had made clear it was temporary and conditional and could be rescinded. "Describe meal times," the head of the DMLE said. He described meal times. This was harder than the bedroom, for a reason he did not examine while he was describing it. The portions, what Dudley got and what Harry got. The meals he had been given and the meals he had been denied. Cooking breakfast before school from the time he was old enough to reach the cooker, and eating what was left when he was done, and not eating when he had not been given anything. He had learned to eat quickly when he had the opportunity, which was a habit he was still unlearning in the leaky cauldron. He had understood all of this as a condition of his presence in the house, rather than as anything particular. The quill continued. The head of the DMLE wrote in her own notes alongside the transcription. "Mr. Potter," she said, when he had finished the mealtimes, "did anyone from the wizarding world ever come to the house? To 4 Privet Drive, I mean. To your aunt and uncle's home?" Harry considered this. "The AMRS people," he said. "Twice. I didn't know about the third time until after." "Before those visits, in the years between them, did anyone from the wizarding world visit the house?" "No." "Did anyone visit after the most recent AMRS attendance, the one from this summer?" "Not to the house," Harry said. The minister for magic. I met him at the Leaky Cauldron afterward. After I'd left." "He did not come to the house?" "No." The head of the DMLE did not change expression. She wrote something in her notes. She wrote it carefully, not quickly. The way you wrote something you wanted to make certain was legible. "Thank you," she said. "That concludes the formal part of the interview." He was given a copy of the transcript. He was told the inquiry was ongoing and that he would receive formal notification of findings when the review was complete. He was told by a ministry clerk who appeared as if from nowhere and escorted him to the lift that the next Hogwarts Express wouldn't run until tomorrow. He would need to arrange somewhere to stay. The Leaky Cauldron had been notified. He found himself in the atrium. He sat on a bench near the fountain and held the copy of the transcript, still rolled and sealed, and watched the golden figures pour water into the basin. Witches and wizards moved around him with the purposeful walk of people who were somewhere they went every day. Nobody paid particular attention to a thin boy with black hair and round glasses and a lightning bolt scar sitting on a bench near the fountain, which was how Harry had learned to prefer things, and how, he suspected, the world had preferred him for most of his life. The Hogwarts Express had left at 11 o'clock this morning from platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross. It was now past 2 in the afternoon. Ron was on it. Neville was on it. Hermione was on it. Harry was here. He was 13 years old, sitting in the Ministry of Magic, holding a sealed copy of a transcript of 2 hours in which he had described his own childhood to a woman who had asked him questions in the fair, strict manner of someone who was writing things down and not going to close the file. Everything he had said was now in the record. The cupboard, the meals, the padlock, the smallest bedroom that had been Dudley's second bedroom before it was his. The minister who had met him at the Leaky Cauldron and had not come to the house. All of it in the record. 3 flags and a routing note, and now 2 hours of answers to careful questions entered into the ministry's welfare register and sealed. He had never said any of it to anyone who wrote it down. He had said it now. He did not know yet what that meant. He thought it probably meant something. He did not know yet whether the record would amount to anything. He thought it probably would. He sat with the transcript and waited to find out where he was supposed to go next. Snape arrived at the headmaster's office in the first week of September, when the castle had been full of students for 4 days, and Dumbledore had been waiting for the report in the patient way he waited for things he was not eager to receive. He came directly from his quarters without stopping for pleasantries, which was not unusual. He sat in the chair opposite Dumbledore's desk and opened the notebook he had brought and presented his findings in the ordered, economical way he presented anything he had thought through carefully. Statement first, evidence second, limitations third. The bond of blood charm. First condition, annual return to the Dursley household. This condition was verifiable, and, as far as Snape could determine from the literature, satisfied by presence and intention. Harry's returning, annually, in the awareness that the return mattered. The DMLE's likely finding, that Harry could not be required to live at Privet Drive as his primary year-round residence, would not automatically end this condition. 1 annual visit, voluntary and deliberate, might satisfy it. Second condition, the harder one. The charm required Harry to be able to call Petunia Dursley's house his home. Snape had spent 2 weeks with the relevant texts, and he was precise about what he had found. The anchor mechanism of blood bond sacrificial protection was built on love. The creating love, Lily's sacrifice, and the sustaining love, the recipient's acceptance of the protected child as family. The charm renewed itself annually through the blood connection, but the renewal drew on whatever the anchor relationship contained. If what it contained was resentment and compliance rather than any remnant of familial warmth, the renewal might have been degrading since the first year. Not breaking. Degrading. The protection might be substantially weaker than the charm's theoretical maximum. This is conjecture, Snape said. He said it the way he said most things, as a statement of what was true, not an apology for what was insufficient. I cannot measure the charm's current strength directly. No instrument exists for it that I have been able to locate. I am extrapolating from the conditions described in the welfare record and from the theoretical properties of anchor bond renewal. The argument is sound. The evidence is indirect. Dumbledore had listened to all of this without interrupting. He looked at Snape across the desk and said, "The charm has held for 12 years. Harry is alive. No agent of Voldemort has reached him at Privet Drive across 12 summers. Has it?" Snape said. "Or have Voldemort's agents simply not tried?" The fire in the grate made the only sound for a moment. Voldemort in 1993 was without a body, a wraith since Godric's Hollow, without evidence of directing sustained effort at any specific target. The threat was real, but it had not been the threat of a sorcerer actively pressing against a specific protection each summer. The protection might have been untested. Snape said it because it was methodologically honest, not as an argument for the charm's failure. Dumbledore turned the possibility in the way he turned things he preferred not to hold, carefully, from all angles, without flinching at the shape of it. "If you are right," he said, "then the protection has been substantially less than what I believed. Harry has been at Privet Drive under conditions the record describes, in the assumption that those conditions were the cost of a protection that was holding at full strength." He paused. If it was not holding at full strength, then the cost was being paid for a diminished good, Snape said. He said it with the precision of a man who was being accurate and who did not need to do anything more than be accurate. Dumbledore looked at the fire. On his perch near the window, Fawkes was still, watching with the ancient, unreadable attention of a phoenix who had been in this office across multiple headmasters and had observed a great many conversations of this kind. "What can we do practically?" Dumbledore said. The practical resolution was cleaner than the theoretical one. The DMLE inquiry would find that Harry could not be compelled to return to Privet Drive as his permanent residence, and neither of them could prevent that finding without obstructing an inquiry staffed by someone who would not be obstructed. What could be preserved was the first condition, an annual return, brief, voluntary. Harry had said, "I'm not doing it for him," which meant he would do it in the explicit knowledge of why. The second condition, neither of them could resolve. Whether an annual visit by a boy who had described his first 11 years there to a ministry investigator could satisfy the charm's requirement that he call it home was not a question with a clean answer. Petunia Dursley had opened the door in 1981 and kept faith with what the letter had asked, in the narrowest possible way. Whether that had contained enough of what the charm needed was something they could not yet determine. "If I had been wrong," Dumbledore said, "about what the charm required, if the protection has been degrading since Harry's aunt's first year of resentful compliance, then the argument I have made for 12 years was built on a condition that no longer existed." He said it the way he had said, "That was wrong," to Harry, without softening, because he had reached the age and the point in the particular conversation where softening was a form of dishonesty. Snape said nothing. He did not say. Then you sacrificed 12 years of the boy's childhood for a protection that was weakening from the first year, and the argument that justified it was therefore unsound from the beginning. He did not say it. It did not need to be said. The sentence existed in the space between them, with the particular weight of true things that have not been spoken, and Snape had enough control over his own silences to let it sit there rather than make it spoken. He thought about a doe he had been able to produce since the winter of 1982, and about why it had that shape, and about what connected the two. He thought about it for the length of time it took to close his notebook. He stopped, because there was nothing to be done with the thought, a fact that had not changed in 12 years. Lily's name was not in the room. He did not put it there. "Then this is what I will do," Dumbledore said. He would tell the DMLE that Harry may return to Privet Drive once annually, briefly, with the explicit agreement of all parties and the explicit understanding that this was the charm's minimum operational requirement and not a return to permanent residence. He would cooperate fully with the inquiry's finding. He would accept, in the official record, the consequence of the placement arrangement he had made in 1981. "And if the second condition fails?" Snape said. "Then Snape's conjecture will have been correct," Dumbledore said, with the precise word. "And we will address what that means when we can measure it, which we cannot yet." "No," Snape said. "We cannot yet." He left. The door settled behind him. Dumbledore sat at his desk in the evening quiet of the headmaster's office. The portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses dozed around him in their frames. The fire burned steadily. Fawkes folded his wings and was still. He was 112 years old. He had placed Harry Potter with the Dursleys because a charm required a blood relative, and because the charm promised protection, and because he had genuinely believed, that the protection was worth the conditions it required. He had had 12 years in which to examine that belief closely, and had not examined it closely enough, because examining it closely would have required him to act on what he found, and he had not been ready for what acting on it would cost. Someone else had acted. A healer at St. Mungo's admissions, reading a welfare flag she had not created for a child she had never met, had done what the standard protocol said to do when the standard protocol told you to do something and an annotation in a margin told you not to. She had done her job. He had not, in 12 years, made it possible for anyone to do that job. He had the greatest motive of anyone in the wizarding world to keep that file suppressed. He knew this. He had made the choice, this time, not to suppress it. He could not decide if not suppressing it when he had the chance made up for having allowed it to reach the point where it needed not suppressing. He suspected it did not. He was 112 years old, and he was still learning that the difference between a protective choice and a harmful one was frequently invisible from the inside of the choosing, and was only visible in retrospect, in the record, in what someone who had not been involved could read in 3 flag reports and understand in 7 lines. He had a great deal left to do before the school year properly began. He turned to the desk and did it. Neville went to St. Mungo's 4 times a year, roughly, when he could arrange it, during Hogsmeade weekends, or on the Saturday visits that the school sometimes permitted for students with family circumstances, which was a category the school applied to him with the particular careful vagueness of an institution trying to be kind without naming the thing it was being kind about. He had been going since before he could remember what it had been like not to. He knew the route, the antiseptic smell underneath everything, the lime-green healer robes that had seemed strange to him as a small child, and now simply looked like what healers looked like. The ward he went to was on the 4th floor, the Janus Thicky ward. He had learned the name when he was 7 or 8, from a healer who had referred to it by name when speaking to his grandmother, and he had filed it the same way he filed most things that were difficult. He kept the information and did not volunteer it. It was October, and he had been to see his parents twice since term began, on Hogsmeade weekends when he did not go to Hogsmeade. He suspected some people had noticed and made the kind decision not to ask. He and Harry were sitting in the Gryffindor common room on a Thursday evening, in the quiet of 2 people not being especially productive at their homework, when Neville mentioned the hospital. He was not certain, afterward, why he mentioned it at that moment. Perhaps because the firelight was warm and the common room was quiet, and Harry was the particular kind of company that made mentioning things feel low risk. Perhaps because it had been on his mind since his last visit, a fortnight ago, when he had been sitting at his mother's bedside and trying to remember which things he had already told her on previous visits, and which things were new. "The last time I was there," Neville said, "the healers at the admissions desk were talking about something, a file." He was still looking at his parchment, not at Harry. "Someone famous, a file that had gone to the ministry. They were saying it as though it was remarkable, the way healers say things when they think you're not listening." "What did they say about it?" "They said someone had refused to close it." Neville turned a sentence in his herbology essay and found it wrong and crossed it out. 3 times it got sent to someone, and 3 times they closed it, and then this healer just didn't. Sent it to the ministry instead of closing it. He kept his eyes on the parchment. He heard Harry, beside him, stop writing. The pause went on for longer than it needed to. Neville waited it out, which was something he had gotten better at over the years, sitting in a ward on the 4th floor of a hospital and waiting for his parents to focus. "That was me," Harry said. Neville looked at him. He had known Harry Potter for 2 years. He had known him as the person who ended up in his dormitory, who was kind in the uncomplicated way of someone who had a great many things to deal with and did not spend energy being unkind to people like Neville when there was no reason to. He had not known. He had not thought to connect the hospital gossip to Harry, which felt obvious now, which felt like the kind of thing that was always obvious afterward. "The AMRs came to my aunt and uncle's house," Harry said. He was looking at the fire, not at Neville. "When something went wrong, with magic near me, they wrote things down in a report. It happened 3 times, and the reports went to St. Mungo's because that's the routing, apparently, and the reports kept getting closed, and then a healer didn't close the 3rd one and sent it to the DMLE instead. I didn't know they existed," Harry said. "Not until Dumbledore told me. He said it the way you said something you had said before, not to another person, perhaps, but to yourself, in the version of events you were still working out. The way something became a fact only incrementally, by being said in different ways, until you had been around it enough times to believe it." Neville turned it over. "I didn't know either," he said. "About my parents. I knew. I've always known. But I knew the way you know something that you found out by accident, and that no one ever put in a letter and said to you properly." He stopped. He turned his quill in his fingers. "No one has ever said it to me properly. They say it around me, and they say it to my grandmother, and the healers talk to us, to her, and I'm there, and I hear it, and I know all of it. But no one has ever written it down in a letter and said, 'This is what happened. This is what the record says.'" Harry was quiet. "St. Mungo's writes everything down," Neville said. They write down what my parents can do and what they can't do, and which day was a better day than the day before, and which day wasn't. They write it all down, and the ward healer has a chart, and they review it." He paused. "Someone reads it. That's what they do. It's their job to read it and write things down and keep the record." "And this time they didn't close it," Harry said. "And this time they didn't close it." The fire shifted. The common room was warm, the way it always was, the red and gold warmth of a room that had been a common room for a very long time, and was used to the particular quality of young people sitting in it in the evening, and not quite saying what they meant. Somewhere deeper in the castle, something large walked past a corridor. Peeves, probably, or one of the older ghosts. Neither of them moved. "Does it help?" Harry said. "Them writing it down, your parents?" Neville thought about this honestly. "I don't know," he said. "It doesn't fix anything. But it means someone knows. Someone who isn't me or Gran, who doesn't love them. Someone who just reads charts for a job. They know what kind of day it was." He looked at the fire. "I think that's not nothing." The portrait hole opened with a sound that was not subtle, and Hagrid came through it, a process that required the quantity of manoeuvring that Hagrid's entry into any moderately sized space always required. He arrived in the common room, with his coat and his beard, and the 11.5 feet of him that filled the available space the way Hagrid always did. "Just wanted a word," Hagrid said. His beetle-black eyes went from Harry to Neville, to the fire to Harry again, reading the room with the precision of someone who had spent a great many years watching people and learning things they hadn't meant to show him. He pulled a chair up with a hand the size of a frying pan and sat in it, and the chair made a sound it would probably not recover from. He did not say anything about the welfare inquiry. He did not mention the DMLE or the transcript or the meeting at the Leaky Cauldron in August. He did not say, "I was the one who brought you to Privet Drive in 1981, wrapped in a blanket on a flying motorbike, and I have been thinking about that for the past several months." He did not say any of it. He reached into the enormous pocket of his coat and produced a treacle tart wrapped in a cloth. He set it on the table in front of Harry. "Made you a thing," he said. Harry looked at the treacle tart. "Thanks, Hagrid." Hagrid looked at him for a moment, with the particular look he had when he wanted very much to say something, and had decided not to, which was an expression that contained a great deal. Then he pushed himself up from the chair, which he had clearly not improved, said good night to both of them, and went back through the portrait hole with the same degree of manoeuvring that had admitted him. Neville closed his herbology essay, which was not finished, but which he had decided was finished enough for tonight. He said good night to Harry. He went up to bed. Harry sat in the common room alone, holding the treacle tart. The fire was warm. The scar on his forehead, the lightning bolt scar, didn't hurt. It hadn't hurt for more than 2 years, and he had stopped expecting it to, and started expecting the absence instead, which was its own kind of knowledge. He was at Hogwarts, which was the closest thing to a home he had found. He thought, St. Mungo's had a file on me. And this time someone read it and didn't close it. He did not know yet what that was going to mean. For the inquiry, for the bond of blood, for the next summer and the one after that. He did not know what the record would eventually do, but he thought about Neville sitting on the 4th floor of a hospital, watching healers write things down on a chart, and he thought about the healer at St. Mungo's admissions, who had read a flag report 3 people had already closed and had decided not to close it, and he thought that Neville was right. It was not nothing. The agreement was 1 day. Harry had read it in the formal language of the DMLE correspondence, which said annual brief return and minimum operational period, and other phrases that meant 1 day Once a year, and then you can leave. He had come on the last day of June, which was the first date that had been available after the Hogwarts Express and the journey back south, and the logistics of arriving at a house he did not live in. He knocked. He had never knocked at this door before. He had always had a key, or the door had been unlocked, or his aunt had been waiting at it, with the particular expression she wore when she was anticipating his arrival and preparing for it. He knocked now because he was here under an agreement, and not under the assumption that the door would open for him, and because the distinction felt correct. His aunt opened the door. She was wearing what she usually wore, which was something neat and unremarkable, and her face was doing what it did when she did not know what expression was appropriate and had settled on the absence of one. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. She stepped back. He went in. The house smelled the same. It always smelled the same. A particular quality of cleanness, of laundered curtains and something cooking somewhere, and the faint chemical note of whatever his aunt used on the kitchen surfaces. A smell that was entirely his aunt and entirely this place, and that he had known since before he could remember knowing anything. He stood in the hallway and let it land on him. Under the stairs, the cupboard door was closed. He did not open it. He did not need to. He knew, now, what a healer at St. Mungo's admissions had read in a flag report about the room recently converted from a storage space. He knew the clinical language. He knew the words, "No personal belongings of note," and "a padlock is affixed to the outside of the child's door." Those words were in an official record now, in the DMLE archive, in St. Mungo's active register, in the formal transcript of a welfare interview he had given, sitting across a table from a woman who had asked him careful questions and written down the answers. He looked at the cupboard door and did not open it because there was nothing in it that was his anymore, and there had not been for 3 years, and because knowing it was in the record was a different thing from needing to prove it. He went to the kitchen. His aunt made tea. She did not speak to him about the inquiry, or about the welfare flags, or about the DMLE correspondence that had presumably reached this address and that she presumably knew about. He did not speak to her about those things either. There were not, he thought, words between them for any of it. At least not words he was ready to deploy in a kitchen on a Tuesday in June when they were both observing the conditions of an agreement. He had been told, in the formal DMLE language, that the purpose of the annual visit was to maintain the conditions of a protection. He was maintaining them. She had opened the door. That was the sum of what the day required. They drank tea. The kitchen clock made its usual sound. Outside the window, the garden was the same garden. He sat in it for most of the day. He thought, in the afternoon while his aunt was elsewhere, about what had changed. Not the danger. Sirius was free and innocent, but still a fugitive the Ministry believed guilty, and Voldemort was still coming back in some form. Not his parents, dead since October 1981. Not the prophecy, which he did not know about, and which was still there, whether or not he knew. What had changed was the record. 3 welfare flag reports in clinical language, a DMLE transcript, a finding, a routing note, a file now in the active register and not going to be quietly closed. Dumbledore's choice in 1981 was in the archive, all of it documented, with a reference number. A year ago he had not known any of it existed. He had not known there had been flag reports, or that someone had closed them each time, or that a Ministry annotation had said, "Do not escalate." He had known what his life here was, the way you knew something you lived, from the inside, without the outside having words for it. Now the outside had words for it, official words, not going to be unstamped. He thought it probably mattered that they were there, He did not know yet exactly how. He left before dinner. He did not look back at the house. He went to the flue point Dumbledore had arranged, said the address, and went. The burrow was loud. It smelled like whatever the Weasley matriarch was cooking, which involved garlic and pastry, and something he could not identify, but which made him realize, stepping through the kitchen door, that he had not eaten since breakfast. Arthur Weasley was in the kitchen when Harry arrived, attempting to reassemble a Muggle transistor radio using a combination of spellotape and what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. He looked up. "Harry!" He said it the way he always said it, as though Harry's arrival was both expected and still a pleasant surprise. "Good trip? Come in. Come in. Are you hungry?" "Yeah," Harry said. He was. The letter from St. Mungo's found him that evening, delivered by an owl he didn't recognize, a small brown bird with the methodical manner of a hospital postal owl. He took the letter up to the room that was Ron's, and that now also had a camp bed in it for Harry, and he sat on the camp bed and read it. The language was formal for most of it. The DMLE inquiry had been formally resolved. His file had been transferred from the closed register to the active register at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, effective the previous month. The active register meant the file remained available for review rather than archived. There was a reference number. At the bottom, below the official section, someone had written in smaller handwriting. The same small, precise handwriting he recognized from the routing note he had read in the DMLE interview. The handwriting that had said, "Action required. You are welcome to come to the hospital if you need anything." Harry read it twice. He folded the letter. He put it in his trunk, at the bottom, under his school things, where it would stay through the summer and into September. Then he went downstairs. The Burrow's kitchen was warm. It was always warm, the way the common room at Hogwarts was warm, with the warmth of a place that was used to people being in it and had grown accustomed to their presence. Ron was at the table with Ginny, conducting a low-level argument about something that had apparently begun before Harry came in, and would not resolve until it had run its natural course. Fred and George were somewhere in the house. Arthur Weasley had abandoned the transistor radio and was asking the Weasley matriarch something about spark plugs. Someone had set a place at the table for Harry. He sat down in it. The argument between Ron and Ginny moved around him, the way noise moved around him here. Not at him, not requiring anything from him, just present in the way that a family's noise was present, filling the room without demanding that he do anything about it. The Weasley matriarch put food on the table. He ate. He was 13 years old, almost 14. Still thin, still small for his age, still wearing glasses that needed tightening, still carrying the lightning bolt scar on his forehead that had been quiet for more than 2 years now. Still without parents, still with Sirius somewhere out there, innocent and free and unable to come home. Still with a war waiting at the edge of everything, in a shape he did not yet know fully. None of that had changed. But in the archive at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and in the active register at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, disguised as the abandoned Purge and Dow's lilted department store on a London street that nobody on the street noticed, there was a file. It was